The COVID-19 Military Support Initiative was launched by the Association of Defense Communities, Blue Star Families, and participants of the White Oak Collaborative. It's a comprehensive resource for communities, states, and military families during this pandemic, with virtual events, daily news updates, and ongoing pain points polling. The Association of Defense Communities is a leader in supporting the resilience of communities and states that support America's military. Blue Star Families is a national nonprofit supporting active duty, National Guard, Reserve, veterans, and their families while strengthening local communities. The initiative is presented by Booz Allen Hamilton, with significant support from USAA. Other sponsors include the Bristol-Myers Squibb Foundation, the Association of Military Banks of America, the Military Housing Association, Hunt Companies, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, and First Command Financial. And now, today's CMSI virtual event.
Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us today. If you don't know me yet from previous town halls, I'm Kathy Roth-Duquet. I'm CEO and co-founder of Blue Star Families. We're so delighted to have you with us today. Thank you for attending today's town hall, Strategies for Career and Family Post-COVID-19. We're particularly excited about this topic. We've had lots of requests for it. Before we get started, I want to give a special shout out to our partners at Rally Point, who were very helpful in spreading the word on this event. We know many of you will have questions, and we're here to answer those questions. Please go ahead and submit them via the chat function on the webinar, and we'll get them answered. Any questions we can't answer during this webinar, we will get those answers from our panelists and put them up on the CMSI website afterwards. That's our commitment to you. I'd like to kick off this conversation about strategies for career and families post-COVID-19 with a real leader in the military family space, Ellen Dunford, spouse of the previous chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a longtime military spouse, an advisor to Blue Star Families, a friend of mine, and a mentor to many, many in this space. I wonder if I might ask you to join us now, Ellen. You've been a career professional and a working mother and a wife during your long career in the military, and thank you for joining us today. Oh, and we have to put you on off mute.
All right, can you hear me now?
Perfect, perfect. Ellen, thanks for joining us. You know, there aren't right answers for every family. There's different answers for different families right now. And as people look at the changing nature of society, some places are closed, some are open. There are some concerns about schools, some concerns about careers. I just wonder some of your overall thoughts about how families might approach this period during this pandemic.
Well, I think one of the really hard things is when everything is a conditions-based situation. So if this, then I might do that. But I don't know. Maybe it's going to be this, or maybe it's going to be that. And you may have adjusted to where you are now and your current situation, but we know it's going to change. And so for a lot of people, that's a huge source of stress because it's not like either A or B, it's A through Z. Will you move? Will you return to work? Will the kids return to school? Will they return to school and then get sent back home because the virus spikes and they have to shut things down? You just don't know. So I think one of the things that's really important for people to do is to really break down all of these options into pros and cons. Come up with, you know, as many options as you can for a response to the variety of situations which may come up. And by breaking it down into pros and cons, you may find that something that you thought would be awfully hard actually looks a lot better. and vice versa. And of course, you have to include your spouse if they're around, in trying to figure out what really makes sense for your family and possibly your children. When we moved during our oldest son's senior year in high school, right before he started senior year, we gave him the option. Some civilian friends had said, you know, he's welcome to come live with us for the year. We gave him the option, and he opted to move with us for his senior year because that was what was important to him. And I think that, you know, whether it's geo-bacheloring, childcare options, your budget adjustments, all of those things, you really need to sit down and take a look at it and figure out what makes sense. One of the things I think that we've all learned from this whole experience with COVID-19, shutdowns on employment, changes in kids being home. You thought you were going to send them to camp so you could work full time. Well, that's not going to happen maybe. Is the importance of having emergency plans and emergency savings. One of the challenges, and I think it came up in one of the Blue Star family surveys and also in an NMFA survey, was the lack of emergency funds in many military families. And so I think we all have to take a look at what have you learned from the past number of months of the things that maybe you weren't so prepared for or that you didn't have a game plan for. And that's really my suggestion, is to sit down and go, okay, what do we do right? What do we do wrong? What could we have done better? What are our options for right now and for the future?
Can you think of a time in your and your husband's career where, you know, unexpected things happened that perhaps you could share how you guys made decisions at that time?
Oh God, there's so many unexpected. I mean, like, life was just all full of unexpected things. You know, having 3 kids in 3 years when I thought I was going to have larger gaps and go back to work more was a huge surprise, and you just deal with it. Sometimes it was a PCS move that came when it was not anticipated. When we got married, you know, 35, close to 36 years ago, whenever you had to change a job, it was a huge deal because there was no internet. You were trying to job hunt from, you know, thousands of miles away and things like that. But I think for us, one of the really challenging things for me, and let me see if I can, oops, well, that page didn't print off, but it's essentially, I would say, one of the greatest opportunities, but most frightening opportunities, was entering a really high visibility role where people have all these expectations of you. And to a certain extent, it's like entering parenthood. There's all these expectations of what you're going to do. But there's no set rules about what to do other than looking at what previous people have done. But you're not those previous people, so that may not be exactly the right thing. Things like for our female service members, you may not have a really good example of, should you have a second kid, third kid? Should you stay in the service? Should you co-opt more stressful jobs that could lead you on a better path? Or do you decide, I'm going to take some things that are not as good for my promotion level, but allow me to be with my family? I mean, the big thing is you are not the other people. You can look at their experiences and you can say, but you're not them. So you really have to sit down and look at what your primary goals are and what's going to give you a sense of satisfaction in the end.
And one of the things we're hearing quite a lot from spouses right now is, should I even try to work? My kids are not able to go to camp. They may not be able to be in person in school next year. What are the pros and cons of stopping a career? What are some of the resources I should be looking at? You know, what kind of advice, or where might you steer people who are thinking through these kinds of questions?
Whether to work or not is such a personal thing. And it's also, once again, it's that conditions-based situation, because you look at it and you say, well, you know, what kind of pay am I going to get? What is childcare cost here? Does it flush out? For me, as a physical therapist, I had to keep working in order to keep up my licensure. I could not take off 3 years and not work at all and still maintain my license. So I remember at the point where I had my first child, we moved to Massachusetts when he was about 8 weeks old, got ourselves settled, you know, got the house all settled, and then I went looking for jobs and was offered one, which luckily had childcare on the premises. So that was great. I was able to navigate my hours. And paying for one child in childcare worked out pretty well. 20 months later, I had another kid. 17 months later, I had another kid. And by the time I ended up paying for my childcare and my taxes, I was making like $3 an hour. For me, it was well worth it because I needed to keep up my professional licensure. I loved what I did. I absolutely loved it. And that was a decision that I was just not going to be an income producer. Essentially, I mean, I was sort of like paying for diapers.
But it gives you the ability to preserve that for the future, right?
Right. And so one of the things that people have to think about is, if I am in a profession, is there something I need to be doing to either maintain my hireability within that profession, or am I really trying to move ahead in my career and move up to a higher management level, which requires me to really be more game in the space, in that employment space? And that's really an individual thing. I mean, for me, I really didn't have an interest in going into physical therapy or department management. I really wanted to do hands-on. That was my true love. So for me, as long as I could do that, that was fine. If you're someone who is really not set on a career yet, I think that there are some great opportunities in sampling and going out of the box. I had started out doing trauma care and really loved it. I worked at a great facility in Virginia, lots of neurology patients, trauma patients. And then we went to rural North Carolina to Camp Lejeune, and there was like nothing. And the trauma center was about an hour and a half away each way. And I knew I couldn't do that. And I ended up falling into the school system, which I never wanted to do pediatrics. I mean, I had done an internship in it, but I just didn't want to do it. And then I got into the school system and I fell in love with it. So to me, going outside your comfort zone can sometimes be the best thing you ever did. You know, I have a brother who was in hotel and restaurant management, left his job because he just wasn't happy there, went to work for a friend in construction who had a small construction company. Just, he had a business background. The guy needed somebody to just sort of get everything straightened out on the business end. And that was, you know, 32 years ago. He's still there. He took a chance doing something that was out of his normal zone. So I think for some people, it can be a great experience, even if it tells you that you don't want to do that. At least you've explored it. So the risk taking is definitely a part of what many of us have to do.
Yeah, it's a great point. You know, it reminds me of a lot of my own experiences. I'm a lawyer, and a lot of times I kept my bar active, even though I wasn't practicing law, but you don't want to let your credentials go. It's worth making that investment of continuing education and of, you know, the cost for your future. Also being alert to having a different path than you think you might have. You know, with Blue Star Families, I started we were all volunteers when we started the organization. So I never thought I was going to run a military family support organization. But I did. I started a volunteer activity that grew. It became a professional activity. So and part of that was because I was living in a place I couldn't practice my profession.
Right, when you were overseas, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the fact that people might not be able to do the work they had planned to do now doesn't mean they're not going to find interesting work to do, get additional training, do
Right.
some volunteering, do some online work. Blue Star Families, NMFA, Hiring Our Heroes, a lot of organizations have training that they can provide military spouses for free, right?
Yeah. And, you know, it's so hard because we have these imposed gaps. I mean, I kind of went through and I was making a list of the challenges to military spouses that most of your civilian spouses will not have to face. And I say most because there are always people who are married to someone who's a civilian but is in a very transient kind of a job. And so it's not exclusive to us. Licensure and certification changes, trying to finish your professional education if you started and then you move. Achieving and maintaining your skills and your seniority can be really hard. Lower wages and sometimes, you know, lower employment rates. Your overseas duty time is definitely a killer for a lot of people because in many cases you cannot legally work there. Things like you have broken employment time. I mean, for me, I'm not one of those people who could work, you know, work up through Friday and then Monday the Packers come. I mean, I would always have to take off several weeks beforehand. And then once we moved, there's another month of broken employment time on the other end. So explaining that to employers was sometimes a challenge. And then there's all these expectations, both on the part of other people, on the part of your spouse, and on your own self, of what you think you have to do because of your service member's position, the unit they're in, or whatever. And that is sometimes the most challenging thing for us to get over. And even with our kids, I mean, you know, you think of how the jokes they make about when you have one kid, you know, they look perfect all the time and they're eating all these healthy meals. Well, by the time you get to the third, you know, you never sterilize the bottles. You pick the pacifier off the ground, you pacifier off, you stick it in your mouth and you stick it in the kid's mouth, things like that. And so these are, you know, it's difficult. And you also have to create a brand new support group with every PCS. For me, phone calls were not enough. You know, then the internet came along and connections. You need to have in-person connections with someone in your community, and that can be really energy sucking for some people. And then there's the financial challenge of unemployment or underemployment. And one of the things I want to bring up, besides things like school changes, deployment schedule, and all that stuff, is when you are a non-traditional spouse and you're going through all of this stuff. If you are a male spouse, if you are a same-sex spouse, if you are someone who marries in much, much later into the person's career and you're learning it from scratch with someone who's already got 20 years into their career, it can really be daunting. And I think the thing I would say for everyone is you have to put yourself at risk emotionally. Pretty much whatever you do in life. And for us, we do it all the time, every PCS, every job change, all of that stuff. But I think it's one of those things that the more you do it, the better you get at it. You maybe don't like it anymore. Let me tell you, when I was moving into my 8th house in 7 years, I was not a nice person. I mean, I was not a happy camper. But I was much better at it than I was the first few moves. And I think it's the same thing with recreating a tribe when you move. You actually do get better at it. Maybe you don't like it, but you know, oh well.
I think that's a lot of really great points, and I love the business about being risk taking. Here's a question, a little bit different angle on the idea of risk and some practical. My family has 3 kids under 6, and I'm PCSing Oconus in 1 month. What can we do to stay safe and to settle into our new duty station given the pandemic? I'm particularly worried about our flights and about school adjustment. Any thoughts you have to share?
Well, you know, and I don't know whether they're flying commercial or whether they're flying mil air, which I think makes a difference. One, when you're flying mil air in general, the terminal is a much different situation. Here again, you educate yourself. I would, you know, people get overwhelmed with a number of resources out there. My go-to is always Military One Source. Contact them, find out, you know, if you're flying commercial, contact the airline, find out what is the, you know, what is the best advice out there on how to travel, on how to do this. If you're traveling with your children, you need to find out how they're going to seat you on the plane so that, I mean, for me, I flew alone with 3 kids a couple of times. And luckily I didn't have to do it until they were, you know, old enough to go to the bathroom by themselves and nobody was in a diaper. But it was, you know, you need to, if you're, you know, what is it? Forewarned is forearmed. The more you find out about it, how is this airline going to handle it? What are they doing in their terminal space? You know, how are they handling you being able to carry your own liquid hand sanitizer? Do you need to have like 4 bottles, 4 little tiny bottles, or can you bring the big sucker that you usually bring, you know, with you in the car or whatever? All of that kind of stuff. Preparation, preparation, preparation. And then on the other end, you know, check with the command. Do they have sponsorship that can help answer a bunch of these questions? If you've never seen the airport you're flying into, try to get in touch with somebody who has gone there before you and find out what are you going to be met with when you get to the airport. Find out what that country is doing with social distancing, with masks, with everything else, so that you are as prepared as possible. And then, you know, if something doesn't go right, okay, well, you know, if it's not exactly what you thought it's going to be, well, you know, what we say, semper gumby, stay flexible.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And it's important for people to know that Military One Source isn't just a website, but you can call and actually speak to a person, and that person can actually help you get that information you need, whether it's from the airline, as you're talking about, or other places. So that's super helpful.
And one thing I really want to point out about Military One Source is that there is free counseling, 12 sessions, which can be extended to more should you need them. But that's like a huge, huge situation. If your kids need it to sort of get adjusted, they will arrange that. They're doing it telemedicine now, which is great. But I would say have yourself as well informed as possible with any PCS, whether it's overseas or not.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Ellen, I'm going to ask you if you will hang out with us for a little bit. I'm going to bring on Major General Tammy Smith, but after she speaks, I'd love to have you come back and join the panel and answer more questions.
Okie doke.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ellen. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our good friend, Major General Tammy Smith. Major General Smith brings a wealth of knowledge from her accomplished career as an Army officer. She's now assistant to the military assistant to the Assistant Secretary of the Army, MNRA, Quality of Life Programs. Tammy, I'd love to turn things over to you to give folks a bit of an overview and then ask you to stick with us for the panel afterwards. Thank you so much for joining us.
Kathy, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited to be here to talk about family unit decisions, and really excited to see how many attendees are currently here live with us on this particular webinar. So hello to everybody, and thank you for taking the time today. And please keep taking those pain point surveys, because we need to understand about how COVID is impacting you differently in the second and third order effects. And I tell you, I use those results and I look at them, and please just keep taking those surveys for us. They're very informative. You know, PCS season, the choices are always pretty difficult. And boy, Mrs. Dunford, a pro, you know, learned how to get through it. And we got many good tips from her on a from a practical standing of just how to handle it. And she said it, just like a commander, about the conditions-based things that are occurring this year from COVID that make some of the family choices just more difficult in a difficult type of approach that we always have to take. And I would want you to know that leaders are paying attention to it, and they're paying attention to the feedback, and they are interested in trying to, of course, it's always about readiness, but there have been so many things that have been done in this period of COVID to help families and to understand and recognize that these are not normal circumstances. This particular interruption is unique to this time, and the risks that families are facing with COVID are unique to this time. So one of the things that we are taking a look at that will be a huge factor in some of the choices that you're going to make as a family as you move forward, especially in the close fight, is just the availability of childcare. Now, we have been paying close attention to child care capacity across the Army and, of course, across the services, knowing that capacity is everything, and the difference between the capacity for infants and the capacity for other age children, and as we go through there. But we know that we're going to have some unique challenges as our child development centers and our youth programs begin to open up a little bit, because capacity then will take on a bit of a different number as we balance that against what is the safest thing that we can do in a facility for the children to ensure that they stay safe and free of any exposure to COVID. And so just know that we're looking at that very closely and balancing the health of those children as first and foremost, but understanding that the capacity that may have existed on an installation at this time last year might be squeezed a little bit as we put in those safety factors. So we're paying close attention to that. It's being reported at the highest level of senior leaders in the military, and we're doing things as we can to ensure that that capacity stays as open as it can, with increased Army fee assistance for care outside of the CDCs, and we're hitting hard our family care homes and ensuring that we're retaining care providers as we move through, but really a focus on the capacity, because we know that you need that, not only for your soldier, but for spouse employment, of course, as we're moving forward. But that's going to be one of those conditions-based that your family, and as you all who have been on a wait list understand, it's a time and place type of situation, but boy, we've got a laser focus on understanding and seeing ourselves in that capacity. And there's a policy that has been published that will come into play too as we go into the PCS season and the school year, and the Secretary of Defense has reprioritized who has access to the child development centers, now putting the higher priority on individuals in uniform, and balance that against some of the categories that you were previously aware of that included the category of our Department of Army civilians or civilians across the force, but there's been a reprioritization too that will most likely affect you. As we move through the PCS and the uniqueness of this interruption too, I know that there is a lot of concern among families about, well, is what going on, is that going to hurt my career? And in the Army, one of the approaches that we took is that right away, early on, is that families had the opportunity to delay their PCS a year. So individuals who were already identified to move, that there was great leeway in that if your particular family situation, it was better for your family to request to stay in place for a year, then we granted a lot of exceptions to be able to do that. And you know what your situation is best. Of course, there are operational needs. There are some positions and command timelines and those sort of things that wouldn't allow some families to stay in place. but our one thought it was really important that we give families some choices before the uncertainty, and you can at least create some certainty just by staying in place. And so I know many families opted to take that 1 year delay. We've also taken an approach that for like in our captains who are now bound for the captain's career course, is that there was a kind of a debate about which is best for the COVID environment, and also just moving forward to ensure that we keep people on their career path timelines about their captain's career course. And there was a decision made by the Secretary of the Army that captain career course individuals will be going, rather than PCS, to their captain's career course. If there's a start date between June of 20 and December of 20, most captains are going to go in a TDY status, and they're going to be leaving their family. There'll be family stability. They'll be leaving them in place while they go to that course PCS. So we solved one problem, and then we created another, because I am aware that one of the areas that the Blue Star family has identified as an area of needs improvement across the services is time away. And so while we solved and created some family stability by leaving the family in place and just sending the soldier TDY, we created another problem, because now I recognize that now there's going to be a family separation in that particular part. As we look ahead, the importance of our training assignments becomes even more relevant. They've always been relevant, and I know there's that balance between my operational assignment, and you see some emphasis going on about assignments in accessions, recruiting, and in our drill sergeants and our training base, and that has taken on an increased importance across the Army because of just the interruption of our ability to move people through the training base. So some of those assignments that in the past might have been thought of as they're good assignments, but they're not the best assignments. Now a lot of those assignments are front and center in what is important, at least from an Army perspective. So Kathy, I think that I'll stop there and let you move on to the next speaker, and then I will look forward to whatever questions come.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And that was fantastic information. And I have to tell you, you covered a lot of issues that I know are top of mind for folks, with the child care, with the rating of systems. Great information about those captain level classes. I'm confident that there's going to be a lot of people listening to this webinar afterwards to get that information. Thank you. Please stay with us. I'm going to invite Ellen back, and also invite onto the screen Colonel Anthony Sansano, who's the Director of Personnel Programs for the Air Force Personnel Center, Chief Master Sergeant Chad Pryor, who's Chief of the Directorate of Personnel Programs for the Air Force, and Mr. Derek Chandler, Chief of Transportation Policy Division for the Army. Welcome to all of you. And Colonel Sansano, I'd like to start with you. The Secretary of Defense recently communicated that personnel and travel will now follow a conditions-based phased approach. Conditions-based has been a theme here today. Can you tell us what that means, and what special considerations does this create for military families?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and welcome everybody. Yes, you're right. Conditions-based does seem to be the theme of as we go through this. The 22 May Secretary of Defense memo lists two overarching factors for what's being called conditions-based unrestricted travel, and really what that translates to is basically back to a period like pre-COVID-19, right, where a family has PCS orders and they would be able to proceed. So under the conditions-based travel, the two factors that are looked at are both a state and national assessment and an installation assessment. Okay, the state and national assessment is being performed by the Office of Secretary of Defense, Personnel and Readiness. And what they're doing is, as they go through each state and nation that houses, at least over 1,000 service members, they're looking at things like the downward trajectory of positive cases, the downward trajectory of COVID-like symptoms, the removal of shelter-in-place orders. And if certain conditions or those conditions are met at a state or a national level, they will label that state or nation green. Likewise, installation commanders are assessing their own installations, and things they're looking for there are there any local travel restrictions and have they been lifted? They're looking at the ability for the traffic management office for them to get movers to individuals' houses and be able to do it in a safe way, to conduct moves in a safe manner. They're looking at the health protection conditions at each installation. And all of those factor into an overall assessment. And if they meet all those conditions, they're green. So what does that mean to the military member and their family? Well, if you're PCSing from an installation that's green and you're going to an installation that's green, then that move can take place under the unrestricted travel rules, basically a return to a PCS like we knew it pre-COVID-19. So those assessments really just got underway in the last couple of weeks. The Office of Secretary of Defense, right now, it's about, the battle rhythm is about once a week. They push out the new listing of the states and nations and installations that have reached that status. And then from there, military families can see, if they're cleared to travel under that conditions-based assessments.
That's fantastic. And how can people find that information?
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now we're in the growing phases of a single point where this information could be shared and made available to service members and their families. While that development is happening, what each service is doing is taking that information they get from their Office of Secretary of Defense and they're pushing it out to their installation. So like on the Air Force side, when we get it, we're pushing it out to each installation, and then it's disseminated to the airmen and their families from there. So until a single database exists where individuals can go in and check for themselves, the services are providing it out for the members.
Well, that's super.
Another thing I would add on that too is it seems like once a week DoD will do a press release, and in that press release they're also listing those nations, states, and installations that go green. So between both of those pieces of information, service members and their families could find that information out.
Great. We'll direct people to those locations, and we'll also go ahead and post that on the CMSI website so that people can find that wherever they look. Fantastic. Mr. Derek Candler, I'd love to switch over to you. As families begin to focus on moving again, it'd be helpful to hear about what some of the changes are that you all are considering and implementing for moving during the pandemic.
Well, thanks for giving me this opportunity to tell Army's story. One of the things I like to hit on is, a lot of times people are concerned about making moves in this environment. So the first thing that we've done is we were requiring moving companies to conduct screening at their warehouse prior to arriving at their members' residence. And at the same time, they're required to provide a certificate that those screening have happened. I mean, the screening has happened. On the same side, there's a requirement for members, for the soldiers and family members, to certify that they are complying with the CDC requirements. So when the moving companies go in, they're required to wear a mask. They're required to wipe off those frequently touched areas, such as door handles, anything else that's frequently touched. They're required to minimize the number of people in the home to limit contact. And when I say that, we ask family members to do the same thing. For those members who are not required to be around the Packers, isolate those into another area. We've implemented increased the number of inspectors that are on site to ensure that the moving companies are adhering to policies. We're increasing by 248 inspectors. We're targeting 72 of those inspectors for military spouses. So those are some of the things that we hit on. But one of the other things I like to talk about is, often people ask, hey, where can I go to find information? Where can I find information that's going to help me prepare for my move? So we launched a smartphone application. It's called Army PCS Move. You can find it on the Google Apple Play Store, Google and Apple Play Store. Anytime you want to find some information, just reach out to that site. There's a lot of helpful information there. And at the last resort, if you can't find anything there, there's a 1-800 number we have that you could call. And I'd be happy to share that with you later, and you can push that out. The most recent benefit that we pushed forward is that we've increased the monetary allowance for personally procured moves, formerly Diddy moves. So most people know it as Diddy moves. So we used to pay 95%. We are now paying 100% of the estimated cost of what a moving company would have paid. And the good thing about the PPM is for those people who are uncomfortable with having a moving company in their household, that's an added protection. They can make their own move, upload the stuff, move it from point A to point B, and now they get something a little bit closer to what the moving company would have paid. We have established a Army Relocation Advisory Committee, and the purpose of that advisory committee is to kind of handle those internal issues that's been hounding us for years. So part of that advisory committee, the makeup, and we have stakeholders from all the different areas: G1, MNRA, MCOM, the legal office, Army claims, and we have spouses that are part of that. So those things that we've always wanted to improve, this is an excellent opportunity to push those things forward. It's an excellent way to carry out or advocate the Chief's people first philosophy. So if someone wants to participate, we'll be happy to add them to that group.
That's
looking
wonderful.
at increasing. Sorry.
Oh,
sorry.
No, please, Derek. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, and that's about it. But I'll open it up to any questions. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. We will be having questions coming in, and I know, Derek, that actually the Army was working on these changes and reforms for PCSs even before the pandemic, right? So I think you were in a good position to be particularly responsive. And on behalf of military families, we appreciate the initiative and the amount of attention that's been placed there. We do have some questions, but I want to make sure we get around to each of our folks first. So I wanted to ask Chief Pryor. There's a lot of interest about how the pandemic might have altered things like promotions, evaluations, and professional development. A lot of these issues are on service members' minds, particularly on the enlisted career side. Love to hear some of your thoughts about this.
Yes, and first off, apologies for not being able to be on camera. I had some technical issues, so definitely had the opportunity to call in. So welcome everyone. I hope everyone is safe. So yeah, that's a question that we often get in the Air Force is, how is this going to affect my evaluation with the pandemic and promotions and things like that going forward? So I'll tell you that on the Air Force side, one of the things that we did not stop was our evaluations. Our charge from our Air Force leadership was to innovate in COVID, especially in a teleworking environment, to be able to do no harm to our airmen in regards to how they're viewed with their evaluations, but also the access to those evaluations with systems. So on the system side, our folks worked really hard to work some of the technological advances to allow better access, especially if individuals were not able to get on the government computers. They could get on commercial computers and download some of these different type of forms and access them. On the other concerns that we've heard is a lot of folks, what they were doing pre-COVID on their jobs in regards to their specific duties, they had concern that looked a little different today, right? Especially for our folks that are in a teleworking environment. And their concern was, some of my supervision doesn't see me daily as when we interacted pre-COVID, because we're now social distancing, trying to be safe. So what are some different things like that? So just, a couple practices, that I'd recommend personally is, especially if you're in a teleworking environment, is, don't be afraid to ask directly how you're doing, right? When we talk about feedback, and this goes for all services. I think it's a universal type of practice is to have those direct questions to your leadership in regards to how you're doing. I know majority, if not all services, have some sort of feedback mechanism, whether it's in a form type of communication where it's documented, and you'll get those at certain times and periods throughout the year. What I would recommend is that if you're in an environment to where you have those concerns about your evaluations going forward, just reach out directly to your supervisor and ask to do a one-on-one. Take some time to do to fill out one of those forms and have some direct communication. Again, one of the things that's universal among all services is our standards, goals, and objectives. And as leaders, we do a good job of definitely adapting to the environment and setting those clear-cut expectations. But we have to make sure that they're achievable and attainable and measurable, especially when some of our service members are dealing with single parents or children in the home because of daycare issues and different things like that. So just having a sense of awareness going forward.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. I have a lot of questions that came in, so I have a feeling I'm going to be sending some of them to you afterwards. Here's one question. If is TMO accessing that green status, can we assume that if we're moving, our gaining base is green?
Kelly, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, Lieutenant Colonel Santana, I do think this is for you. Is TMO operating on that green status such that if a family is in the process of moving, can they assume that their gaining base is green, or is that not a fair assumption?
I wouldn't assume that a gaining installation is green, right? It'll have to be published through the OSD press release, right? So we don't have to assume we will actually have factual information if a base is green or not. I know from an Air Force perspective, our Air Force TMO offices are scheduling individuals for upcoming moves, and then when the conditions go green at both the gaining and losing installations, those families can actually have the personnel movement that accompanies the shipment of household goods. One of the things I like to say in this part here is the conditions-based travel are one way that military members and families can continue to PCS. There's two other ways. The Office of Secretary of Defense memo lists multiple exemptions to the stop movement order, and most of them are along the lines of like professional mill education, advanced training, all of our accessions and their initial training all the way up to their first duty station, travel for patients. There's a listing in the memo that outlines all the exemptions. And then the final way, and why I bring this one up here, is there's an option for a general officer or senior executive service exemption from the stop movement to allow military members and their family to travel, whether it be for mission essential reasons, whether it be for hardship, or whether it be for humanitarian reasons. So, we could have some scenarios where service members have shipped household goods, but now they may not have the green light to actually proceed. Those situations should be looked at through the chain of command to see if it's appropriate to allow movement underneath the hardship waiver in those cases, since the family's already separated from their household goods.
That's very helpful, and that is an issue we're seeing with our pain point poll that a number of families are experiencing. So I think it's really helpful for people to understand you can appeal a lot of decisions or look for a waiver. So don't assume that your situation is one that you have to stick with.
Right.
Here's an interesting, difficult challenge. It's, I think, emblematic of something a lot of families are facing, and there may be a piece for a number of you to respond to. We have someone who wrote in who has a career in California. However, they have a risk of being laid off next year because of COVID. The service member has orders overseas that will end in their retirement in a year from overseas. They had planned to geo-batch this year with a child in college, in high school, and in kindergarten. But now that the family is looking at perhaps joblessness in home, it might be too expensive for them to geo-batch. The risk of going together overseas, though, is that there may be two people unemployed at the same time. So I think there's a number of questions here to unpack. One of them, General Smith, I don't know if there's a sense that the ability of people to extend time in service will continue if the COVID pandemic itself and the difficulties in the civilian economy continue. Will they continue beyond 90 days?
Yeah, I'm not completely current on some of the extensions that we have done recently because we're now, of course, allowing people to retire on time and do those sort of things. Complicated case of family choices too is depending on the type of job that they're PCSing to, is that we did offer the ability to stabilize families. And again, we're talking about the condition change from to week as the COVID moves through some of the policy changes and such as that. But this particular situation sounds like one that, depending on where the service member is going, that this might be the type of situation where it might just make more sense for both the Army and taking care of a transitioning soldier and family, and the individual to stay put. But I'd be happy to engage more with greater detail.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that's good information for our listener. That might be something the family wants to consider if that's an opportunity to rethink that other assignment. Ellen, I wondered if you wanted to make a comment also, since this is a family situation, if you have any thoughts or recommendations.
Well, I think it really, when we talked about condition-based situations, I mean, this one is really a challenge because the conditions are so unknown. And to a certain extent, you would hope that the spouse who is concerned about their employment would be very honest with their employer and say, this is what we're facing. I'd like to have as clear a picture as possible, not like fire me, but as clear a picture as possible of what the situation will be for me in the coming months. And the employer may say, I honestly don't know. But I think this is one of those chances where you have to sit down and you say all the what ifs, what if this, what if that, what are the pros, what are the cons? And also, what are we doing? What can we do to mitigate the circumstances? So do we have access to funds that if it turns out that the spouse is laid off, are they going to be able to hold on for a little while with that if they do geobatch? I mean, it's us as outsiders. It's a little challenging to give too much advice because we don't know all of the factors involved here, and the family only has limited information. It is a little bit surprising that someone would be sent overseas for just 1 year and then go to retirement. And I would echo what Major General Smith said about, kind of finding out through the service what is the purpose behind that, because I know that most of the time they do try to avoid it. On the other hand, if the family takes a good look at all these different options, I think they will feel better about whatever one they choose, because at least they've explored how they can deal with this in the least destructive way to their family situation. I've got one quote here that it's by James Altucher, who's an author, and he said, "Every day you reinvent yourself. You're always in motion, but you decide every day forward or backward." And I think that applies to families also. The family is reinvented all the time due to the circumstances that they're under. And the services are in the same thing. They're having to reinvent themselves all the time. The people who are going to succeed the most are the ones who are the most informed and the most prepared for a variety of options.
It's a very inspiring statement. Thank you for that, Ellen. We have time for one more question, and this one's for Chief Master Sergeant Pryor. As a senior enlisted leader, what are your thoughts on professional development during the pandemic? And should we consider pursuing it or delaying it given the difficulty about being in person.
Definitely, that's a great question, and I'll tell you, I look at professional development in two ways, right? One is the across all services, the requirement, right? The actual PME, professional military education requirement for our ranks and our promotion. And then there's the other one, which is to me equally as important, is the just the professional development in general, as far as going to college, taking courses, any type of seminars that you're able to attend, and different things like that. So I'll start with the required. I think that if it's required, that you still should pursue it. However, and then especially if it's PME and it ties directly to your promotion. However, I think that as leaders, and at least on the Air Force side, I can speak on the Air Force side that leaders are mindful of the restrictions that we're under, right? So I kind of talked about that earlier with the the environment of some of the homes with single parents and the children being home, and as we look towards more and more opportunities on the Air Force side to do PME virtually. So if it's required, I would say to continue to pursue it. However, to stay in contact with your leadership if you have limiting factors that will not allow you to concentrate fully on your PME and your professional development, because there are waivers and different things that are in place that will allow on the Air Force side for you to pin on your rank without the PME, and you can complete it at a later time once everything is good in your home life or your situation. And then the other piece is just I'm a big advocate, a huge advocate of continuing to seek opportunities for different professional development. I know on the Air Force side, there's a startup of a Air Force quarantine university that was born out of COVID, to where you're able to go out there. I believe it's on Facebook, and then to get that type of information and look at professional development opportunities. Most of the services have some sort of a career assistant advisor or that type of role, to where, or a first sergeant that can also offer countless types of information on opportunities for professional development. So we all know that it's important, and I think that if you have the opportunity to complete it, definitely look at doing that. But we know it's different in this environment.
Thank you for that great response. We are out of time. We are not going to respond on air to a question that came in, but Tammy, General Smith, I do want to raise with you, we had a question about a concern that COVID is disproportionately affecting women in uniform and making it difficult for them to continue in their careers compared to men. So I'd love to follow up with you afterwards about that question. We could perhaps put a follow-on statement on the site. And we appreciate everyone's participation in the audience and your questions. Those we didn't get to, and the ones I didn't mention, we will have answered. For our panelists, what a fantastic panel. What a great range of information. I know I learned a lot, and I know you are very busy people, so we're grateful for your time. Now, time to close out. I want to remember everyone attending today to please check your email following the town hall. We're going to ask you to take a post-webinar survey. Your input is very, very helpful in helping us answer the questions you most want to answer. We are also going to be in the future hosting a Veterans Healthcare During the Pandemic town hall. Stay tuned for that time frame. In the meantime, check out the CMSI website, which is full of resources to help you and your family and your business. We will be posting this webinar so you could share it with your friends. The answers to the questions we were not able to answer during this time, and any resource links that were mentioned. Thank you again for joining us here today. We value you and your time, and we look forward to welcoming you at a future town hall.